This is FE Peer Review. The date is November the 26th, 2021. What is a sustainable human population? A conversation with STST and Deadly Dave. Yesterday evening, I rather spontaneously got involved in a live stream that STST produced with Deadly Dave, in which we had a quite enjoyable, free-flowing conversation that covered a lot of topics. I just wanted to pull out one little moment from that conversation and share it here, along with some additional thoughts I've had in the interim. You'll find the link in the description below to the original live stream and to the entire conversation, if you're interested in hearing it or referring to at least the parts that I've mentioned here.
But actually, that probably, I'm going to sound such a broad generalization, but, there is you're less likely to have children if you have a decent-ish career, really, aren't you? Or have a less amount of children, should I say. So, yeah, I mean, maybe, but then,
that's the exact point of that intro to that movie.
Yeah, who survives out of the... Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound really callous now, but just to the point, but who survives though out of the 8 children from a underprivileged family, or the 3 from a privileged family, or 2, or do you know what I mean? There's obviously a lot of kind of variables there, isn't there, and things that will affect our futures,
Before we go on, I had mentioned the movie Idiocracy, the opening scene of the movie Idiocracy. Deadly Dave had seen it. STSD has not seen it. If you guys haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a hilarious movie. Anyway, I had referred to that opening scene, and that was what started this conversation. Since some of you may not have seen it, I'm going to play a little bit of it here. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to run into copyright issues, but it'll give you the idea.
Having kids is such an important decision.
We're just waiting for the right time. It's not something you want to rush into, obviously.
No way.
Oh shit, I'm pregnant again!
Shit! I got too many damn kids! Thought you was on the pill or some shit!
Hell no!
Must have been thinking of Brittany.
Brittany? No, you didn't! There's no way we could have a child now. Not with the market the way it is, no.
God, no. That just wouldn't make any sense.
Come on over here, bitch! He don't care about you!
Yeah, well, there must be something he likes over here.
You mean nothing to me, baby? Oh, shit. It wasn't me! It wasn't me!
Well, we finally decided to have children, and I'm not pointing fingers, but it's not going well.
And this is helping.
I'm just saying that before I have in vitro, maybe you should be willing to...
It's always me, right?
Well, it's not my sperm count.
Yeah! Yeah! I'm gonna fuck all of y'all! That's my boy!
Yeah, and I mean, that's why, as much as possible, what I try and advocate for is not trying to fight people on their positions on certain things. I mean, obviously, I do that anyway, but more so to find the base point and to educate from there. To find the early point where we need to, again, as I mentioned earlier, critical thinking, and be able to actually just, in general, act or react better to situations, to learn how to take a piece of information and get the right information out of it. And the better we can teach people to do that, then hopefully we can take away the kind of bias that we have in society at the moment, which is where it tends to be wealthier people can be better educated. And that's not a great place to be. I mean, it would be much better if we could be in a society where, yeah, okay, wealthy, maybe that's a thing, maybe that's not a thing. I'm not too, we'll say, sold on either side of that. But regardless of whether, you have that thing there, what you need is that everybody can avail of the education. I mean, if you want to choose not to, that's your own business. But we need to be in a situation where everyone is capable of being educated, and we need to have that not affected by economic means. And if you can do that, then we kind of take away that, and I know it's only a meme idea, but that meme idea from Idiocracy, which is where the less affluent people are the people that produce more children. Well, in that situation, it won't matter because those children can still be educated. So not being affluent doesn't mean you're dumb. And currently at the moment, and I know it's a kind of meme, But less affluent meaning you're dumb doesn't mean that you're dumb. All it unfortunately means is less affluent means you had less access to education. So you haven't had the opportunity to be able to make yourself up to the same level as people that have had that opportunity. So it's not necessarily your fault or anybody else's fault. It's just when we have a society where education isn't available to everyone, the more affluent people tend to have greater access to education, and then that only compounds the problem.
It's a challenge sometimes to figure out where to put the cuts and move from one thing to the next. It wasn't my original plan to put Deadly Dave's bit in there, but I found a contrast between the clip from Idiocracy and Deadly Dave's very perceptive and intelligent analysis of it, in itself too funny not to leave intact. Anyway, I really liked what Deadly Dave had to say, and he moved the conversation at that point on to education, which was a worthwhile direction for it to go. However, at this point, I'm going to pause it and to take a step back and look in this video a little more at the idea of what is it that necessarily reproduces, and what are the consequences. Getting back to the main point of this video, though, I wrote a comment, and I'm building this video around the comment I wrote on that live stream. I believe there is plenty of evidence to suggest that as national groups, such as underdeveloped countries, improve their standard of living, family size, the birth rate tends to go down. So we end up with the ironic situation that those individuals and those societies which are the poorest and least able to provide abundance and opportunity for their children also have the most children. It would be easy to think that if having the most children is some kind of sign of successful adaptation to the environment, the thing that will lead that species to persist, then the higher birth rate of the most economically disadvantaged is, quote, a good thing in terms of survival of our species. Good is subjective, of course, and here I mean good from the perspective of humans who instinctively want to survive and reproduce and prioritize our own species above others. This is an image from Wikipedia showing a map of the world with countries colored according to their birth rates. I just wanted to put this up in order to support the statement I just made about less developed countries. And I think it's not really all that debatable that as countries tend to improve their economic situation, birth rates do also tend to fall in those countries. Continuing on, but there's another dynamic we see in nature all the time. Sometimes an organism will become too successful for its own good. In other words, it will become so dominant that this leads to a breakdown in the local ecosystem, and the things that make life possible for that organism will be pushed out, die off, resulting in a collapse of the dominant species as well. An example of this is when animals like rabbits are introduced into an area where they have no predators. The population will maximize based on resources, food and shelter, but this can result in such a high population density that diseases which would otherwise be rare can reach epidemic proportions due to the density of the rabbit population, and then the population crashes. In Greenland, for another example, the relationship between lemmings and stoats has caused a boom-bust cycle to become a sustainable process, a 4-year cycle in which the lemming population booms, followed by their predators, the stoats, who wipe out the bulk of the lemmings. With their own food supply now diminished, they mostly die off as well, leaving the coast clear for lemmings to breed again. Humanity has created a world in which we have very few predators. Basically, the only limitations to our population is resources, and we seem to be very good at expanding those as well. But are we good enough? Possibly not. There is plenty of reason to be concerned about that possibility and concerned about overpopulation. If there is an upper limit for the path we are on, we won't likely know until we've run into it and find ourselves in the midst of a population crash. This might be due to overdensity, which can encourage pandemics, among diseases which would otherwise have remained minor. This might be due to an increased cost of energy generation due to reduced energy supplies. This might be due to sudden environmental changes, as can be expected with the climate change we are experiencing now. Sudden and catastrophic may not be overnight events. They could possibly even take years or decades. This would make them even harder for us to perceive and manage. So the success of having lots of babies among those populations with the least resources may be pushing us into a crisis state which will result later in a population crash, while the lower birth rate of more prosperous societies may avoid this boom-bust scenario and be sustainable for a longer term. The immediate problem we're facing in the world today with climate change, however, is that the more prosperous lower birth rate societies are using a disproportionately larger amount of natural resources on a per capita basis. To really become sustainable, we need both to limit our population growth towards something approaching replacement level, and we need to become much more efficient in our use of resources. Improvements in efficiency may have an upper limit, and it may be necessary to actually experience some population decline before we are truly in a sustainable position. It can be challenging to analyze exactly where we stand due to the nature of the data. For example, we can look at countries ranked by total CO2 emissions, but then perhaps we should be looking at it on a per capita basis. That would seem more representative of who is benefiting from these emissions and who is not. Here is a ranking on a per capita basis from Wikipedia. We see the Gulf states, oil-producing and wealthier societies near the top of the list. We see the United States right here. We find the USA further down with 15.7 tons per capita per year. China below that with 7.7 tons per year. And the UK below that with 5.7 tons per year. But in fact, this ranking does not reflect the reality, for example, that much of the consumption in the UK is of products manufactured in China. And thus the UK demand, which is the cause of the CO2 emissions, is showing up on the Chinese side of the ledger where the manufacturing is taking place. So I'm not trying to suggest that these numbers in some way are wrong. They're not wrong. The data is what it is. How you organize it can influence the conclusions you draw from it, and you may be drawing inappropriate conclusions if you don't organize it carefully. This gets back to something Deadly Dave said in the live stream with STST and myself when he was talking about critical thinking and the importance of developing a better capacity for critical thinking in our general population through education. The information gets reported. We need to be able to dissect it better. And that's where the critical thinking comes in. We individually need to have the mental tools to draw the most correct conclusions from the data. This will give us the power to be more successful at pressuring our leaders and our political leaders and our business leaders to take the appropriate kinds of actions, and we will be less likely to be taken in when people are acting out of their own self-interest rather than for the good of our society. But getting back to the question, what is it that reproduces and what are the consequences? We're facing some apparent dilemmas. We've seen that the poorest societies in the world today also have very high birth rates. At the same time, on a per capita basis, they consume resources at a far lower rate than wealthier societies. So when we have global meetings, such as COP26, quite rightly, they raise the issue that they cannot be expected to make the same kinds of sacrifices as the wealthy countries who have benefited from 2 centuries of fossil fuel consumption and who continue to consume at high levels. And so we see reporting such as this, COP26, how much are poor countries getting to fight climate change? The amount of money the rich countries also give to the developing world to help it cope with climate change was one of the big battles of the COP26 climate summit. Further details. This is an issue that is very reasonably raised. The underdeveloped nations need very much to improve their economies and bring resources to their poorest populations. For them to do this without the easy money of cheap fossil fuels that was available to rich nations is simply impossible. Unfortunately, we run into another problem, one that saps the whole project of the political will necessary to make it succeed. Here we see a world map of the CO2 emissions per capita from 2017 data. The darkest red being the highest emissions per capita, down to this very pale cream, which is the lowest emissions per capita. And here we see a world map showing wealth per capita, with the dark green being the wealthiest countries, and this dark red being the poorest countries on a per capita basis. And there's an obvious similarity between these two maps. Unfortunately, we also encounter this map, which is Transparency International, which every year ranks countries by what they describe as the Corruption Perceptions Index. And this is what the world map of the Corruption Perception Index looks like. The very same countries that are most in need of support are those with the most, shall we say, problematic organization, leadership, where the support provided by wealthier countries cannot in any way be relied upon to go to where it is needed to make the changes necessary to bring the improvements that the world needs. We need not only to raise the quality of life of the people living in the poorest countries, we need to solve the problem of climate change and bringing down CO2 emissions worldwide. We need to do both things. And this is where the political will runs into a brick wall in a lot of places like the United States, my homeland. We are bothered to see our tax dollars going towards decades-long projects like the one we've just extricated ourselves from in Afghanistan, where huge sums of money end up in the pockets of basically corrupt individuals and organizations, and not benefiting either them or either the people for whom it was intended or us. So these three maps sum up the complexity of the issue, in my opinion. I hope nobody watched this video expecting easy answers, because you're not going to get any. My goal here was to look a little more carefully at the questions. So it seems to me very critical that the world leadership, both economic and political, that they need to address an unspoken issue here, which is that it's not going to be enough to simply throw money at a problem. We can see that where the money needs to go is also to some of the most corrupt countries in the world. Corrupt countries is an unfortunate phrase. I would say countries under the control of the most corrupt organizations in the world, who are run those organizations by corrupt individuals. This is where the money needs to go. And due to the very nature of the corruption problem, we have the least assurance that that money is going to be put to the use it needs to be put to. So I really think that there is not going to be the political will to make this happen as long as that fact is not acknowledged. Once acknowledged, it can then be addressed, and a real structure can be put into place and a real plan can be developed to make sure that the development and the resources needed for that development actually happen for the benefit of those countries, for the benefit of all the people of those countries, as well as the world. Until the world leadership recognizes and brings that out explicitly in their communications with the public, there's going to be resistance, unfortunately, because this stuff needs to get done. It does need to get done. But the resistance is reasonable, because if these actions aren't taken that I've just described, then throwing money at the problem is not going to solve the problem, and we will be as deep into our mess as we are now, and all the poorer for it. Anyhow, I think I've said all I need to say in this video. This was sort of the point of it. I did very much enjoy joining onto the live stream with STST and Deadly Dave. It was a very pleasant evening. I've put a link in the description. Any of you that are interested in seeing this bit or other parts, you'll find lots of interesting material there. I may go back in later and do one or two more like this of other parts of the conversation. Okay, that's enough for this evening. I wish you all a very pleasant day, and I hope to see you again soon. Remember, click that like button on your way out, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Bye-bye.